please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
The world's second most populous country is facing a dual problem when it comes to employing its population. The first problem, the sheer shortage of jobs. So 17 million people are entering the workforce every year, but only 5.5 million jobs are being created. The second problem, a clear mismatch between the skill set of the workforce versus what will be required 5 years from now. So today we focus on the second challenge, that of the future readiness of India's workforce. Hello and welcome to Eye on India. I'm Shireen Bhan. EY, FICCI and NASSCOM have today released a report titled The Future Jobs in India, a 2022 Perspective. Now, businesses across the spectrum were asked to provide insights into the future of the job market in India by 2022. So let me take you through the key findings of this report. Let's start with what the workforce mix will be like 5 years from now. The report shows that 37% of India's workforce will have a new job role, and more interestingly, 9% of the workforce will be deployed in jobs that don't exist today. That's something akin to what software engineers were 20 years ago. The major driver for this tectonic shift in job profiles for India's 600 million strong workforce will, of course, be, among other things, globalization. That will be followed closely by changing technologies, because as new technology pushes businesses to innovate, they will have to hire skilled labor to drive this change. The report also says that these trends will be most palpable across 5 sectors, with IT or business process management leading the way. It will also include the automotive sector, textile and banking and financial services, and the other sector on that list is going to be retail. This sector has in fact seen quite a lot of innovation, especially in the wake of the e-commerce boom. In all of these sectors, the report says that by 2022, nearly 10 to 20% of the workforce will be doing work that we have not yet dreamed up. All of this, of course, suggests that India's workforce will have to go in not just for reskilling, but even a radical change in the skills that they will have to acquire and use. For the IT and BPM industry, nearly 60 to 65% of the workforce may need to acquire new skill sets. This number could be as high as 50 to 55% for the automotive space. This also means that quite a large number of people currently employed in these sectors, that is 25% according to the report, may not have a job in 5 years. And this will either be because they don't have the necessary skill set, or because technology advances would have made their jobs obsolete. And that is an alarming number. So joining me on the show today to discuss the findings of this report, R. Chandrasekhar, President of NASSCOM, Darli Koshi, member at FICCI, Anurag Malik, Partner People and Organization Advisory Services at EY, and Arun Kumar Pillai, Partner Skill Development, Government and Public Services, also joining us from EY. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the CNBC TV 18 special. All right, Anurag, let me start by asking you about how you went about this survey, because we'll discuss the specific findings in just a bit. But are we sitting on a ticking time bomb, if I could call it that, when it comes to jobs?
So the one factor that's being talked about in a lot of detail that will impact jobs is technology.
Yeah.
But, you know, as at EY we looked at it in some amount of detail, we realized that it's a little more complex than that. It's actually a complex interplay of many forces that will impact jobs in India in the next 5 years. So as we looked at it deeper, Shireen, we saw that there are 3 primary forces. So yes, technology, which is absorption or rate of absorption of exponential technologies by Indian companies, is going to be important. But a second factor called globalization is going to be as important. And then there is demographics, which will continue to stay important in terms of defining the future of jobs in India. Let me just drill a little deeper into each one of these. You know, so while there are these 3 primary forces or factors, each one of them have more mega trends. For example, globalization. You know, so we're seeing a lot of changes there. So, you know, absorption of exponential technologies by global companies.
Yeah.
And hence the impact will have on offshoring, or what we are seeing as reshoring in India is going to have a big impact.
Yeah.
Level of FDI flows and how the industry grows, level of exports. You know, actually the number of people, skilled labor that from India that will go overseas, and again, globalization factor, all of this is very important from a future of jobs perspective. The other bucket is demographics.
Yeah.
Now, traditionally, it's been very critical in terms of impacting industry and hence impacting jobs. And we realize that even over the next 5 years, it'll continue to stay big. So factors like millennials and the consumption pattern that they'll drive, urbanization, you know, the new workforce coming into the labor market, etc. So all of it will drive domestic consumption. So sectors like auto, sectors like retail, and hence jobs and skills will get impacted by this. And of course, there's the talked about factor called exponential technologies, which is, you know, the impact that technologies will have on
the disruption that exponential technologies will create across spectrum. But Mr. Chandrasekhar, you know, while we're talking about the future of jobs, let me ask you about the current state of play. Now, according to the report, for 2017, 20 to 35% in the IT BPM and 20 to 25% in the BFSI sectors will face an existential threat to their jobs owing to the evolution of new job roles. I mean, is an existential threat a polite way of saying that these jobs are in danger of being axed?
Yes, I think it's a fairly direct way of saying so, actually. But I think that when you look at it only from that one perspective, it may present a distorted and a hugely alarming picture. It's also important to recognize that there are certain other kinds of jobs that are getting created and certain jobs which will continue but with vastly different skill set requirement.
Okay.
And I think that is what really we need to focus on. And you know, the ticking time bomb analogy that you came up with is very good from one point of view, not from impending doom.
Sure.
But from the point of view of that you have to act now.
And you have to act now, absolutely. And that's why I use that analogy. But if I could just labor on the 20 to 25% as well as the 20 to 35% of the current jobs that face an existential crisis, what kind of jobs are we talking about, especially when we talk about in the IT and the ITES sector? And what could be the new jobs that we should now focus on over the next 5 years?
Well, you know, if you look at certain areas, for example, in the BPM segment, the call center, for example, a lot of these are the kind of jobs which are more amenable to automation. Or if you look at some of the reports that were presented in Davos in January, professions like accountancy, for example, accounting, which are easily automatable, would be most likely impacted. If you look at what are the new kinds of jobs that are coming up in the IT sector as an example, even software development, a large part of it is getting automated. But because of the kind of tools and the ease of using those tools and artificial intelligence and so on.
Right.
But, you know, from a sector perspective, there are 8 major technologies which we have identified, which actually are likely to create wholly new sets of jobs and are also, you know, likely to add jobs of a different type. They will also be skills which are required in many of the current jobs. You know, technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics, machine learning, things like that. And in each of these areas, I think we are trying to focus on those skills.
So I'll talk to you about the level of preparedness to be able to capitalize on these new opportunities to hopefully offset the kind of job losses that we could see in the traditional and the legacy systems in just a bit. But Mr. Koshi, if I could talk to you about what we're seeing as far as the textile and apparel business is concerned. A snapshot, according to the report, 5 to 10% would be deployed in new jobs that do not exist today within the textile and the apparel business. 35 to 40% will need to have a radically new skill set. Absolutely. And about 15 to 20% will face an existential threat to their jobs in 2017. So once again, there is a side that we need to worry about, but there is a side that we need to focus on in terms of future opportunity as well. How ready are we?
In the value chain, when you look at from, let us say, spinning, weaving, processing to garmenting, there are different levels and impact of technology which happens. As you know, already the spinning has become very automated. Weaving is getting highly automated, except the power loom sector, which is taking more time in the diffusion of, you know, this kind of an approach. But the garmenting, if you have seen, when the capital cost comes down and the labor cost rises, and the bridging of this gap is what leads to absorption of new technologies. As you have seen in the underbed trimmers in the machines, which replaced helpers, because such machines became more available and at a lower price. So this can happen. But what we are now seeing, the context of the ENY report, is about the Industry Revolution 4.0. Now, this is something on which people have started talking about, but you can see that the preparation levels to lead to a kind of system by which the labor capital ratios change dramatically, I think it is still quite far away.
Okay. Let's look at the misalignment or the mismatch that we currently have. 15.5 million people entering the workforce, 5.5 million jobs being created. When do we start to bridge that gap is the question.
So when we look at it, this mismatch is existing now also. And in view of this emergence of these exponential technologies, it's going to get further exacerbated. And we must admit that as from the supply side, that is education or the skills infrastructure, we are still not ready for this. Other countries have taken certain steps, like if you look at a country like Singapore, etc., they have initiated various, in fact, they have a program by which they give $500 as credit, skills credit for upskilling of the existing workforce. So as a country, we also, as a government, the industry, we need to sit together and look at this. I mean, this thing is going to, anyway, it's going to happen. So from a skills or educational infrastructure perspective, capacity, and we need to have a discussion on this.
We need to have a discussion. That's exactly what we're doing. But Mr. Chandrasekhar, just to take that point forward, yes, the reskilling needs to happen to cater to the new jobs that will be created. But we also need to focus on labor-intensive sectors to actually be able to create the jobs that are required. I mean, skills is a different story and a different challenge. But what about creating the jobs that we require to bridge the deficit, which, as Arun is pointing out, is only going to exacerbate and get worse?
No, I agree. That is a big question, because we are seeing a continuation of the shift from farm sector to non-farm sector. You know, you had almost 26 million people move from the farm sector to non-farm sector in just a 4-year period between 2011 to 2015. But if you look at, you know, the traditional sources of jobs, just as an example, manufacturing is seen as a big source for job creation. But the nature of manufacturing has changed. It's not what it was 25 years ago. A lot of it has got automated. So it's not only about blue-collar jobs, which you know, in the Industrial Revolution, many of them got automated. White-collar jobs, a lot of them are getting automated because of new technologies and AI and so on. But now we also need to focus on what is called the new-collar jobs, which are new areas that are getting created, as well as the skills that are required even in mundane jobs. I don't want to use that term in any sort of pejorative or negative way, but even in those normal routine jobs, there's a lot of technology which is getting infused. Look at a simple cab driver. I mean, if you don't have, you know, ability to read a map and so on, your effectiveness is reduced. So for each of these areas, I think we also need to relook at the skills needed for existing jobs.
So, Mr. Koshi, if I could ask you, you know, because the report does provide some recommendations to all stakeholders, including the government. Let me focus on the priority when it comes to employment creating sectors. The report says drive job creation in the agri sector through doubling farmer incomes. We're far from that. You know, even if you look at what the state of play is today, and this is a cause for concern when, you know, we've seen farmer agitation across the country on this issue. Drive job creation through government investments in infrastructure. Yes, the government is chalked out, you know, a mega plan. Public spending on infrastructure is a key focus area. Transform public healthcare, education, tourism, hospitality. I mean, we have spoken about this ad nauseum for years. Give me specific solutions that we now need to focus on to ensure that, you know, we do start to actually see changes on the ground.
See, so one point which I want to emphasize is the more the women join the workforce, the GDP has a very positive impact immediately. It has happened in China. We are still very slow in that process. So when you look at
in fact, we've seen a decline.
So when you look at that particular focus, apparel, for example, the moment you look at it as a fashion ecosystem, our DNA of the women in India are so akin to taking this forward into embroideries and karigari and various value additions, and they really love this job. So if we can look at a policy prescription by which we are able to channelize this energy which is already existing in the population to such a labor-intensive industry, which is the most positive capital, labor capital ratio. It could be a very major thing. But we have never articulated the emphasis need to be given to it. The emphasis need to be given for women empowerment through this kind of a job approach. The second is, just take the example of the much talked about free trade agreement. We have said in this report also, it shows that 1.5 lakh additional jobs can be created just with the signing of an FTA, which is pending for quite some time. Those kind of, creating demand for the skills. See, in India, we create skills, but the demand then falls, the skills become irrelevant. So that is the biggest issue. The third and the last one is, how do we really look at combining this domestic and export manufacturing into a manufacturing system which is prepared for cyber physical manufacturing systems which are emerging. Now look at the earlier system. The manufacturing factories were only dedicated to, let's say, export. But one of the very positive change which I see is that in Ludhiana, in Karnataka, many places the factories have now become a dual kind of system.
So catering to the export market as well as domestic.
If we can push those kind of coexistence and dual approach, a two-pronged approach, then we see a positive way of countering the decline in certain kind of situations. Because we are becoming too dependent on a certain basket, and that basket has a certain problem, immediately everything like a cascading impact. We need to protect, because the vulnerable sections are the people, attrition levels in vulnerable sections create the job losses which are visible. It is not the other group which is creating the problem. So we need to really create a more sustainable approach to those two sections, attrition rates and the vulnerable sections which are very
legitimate point that you make. On that note, we'll take a break, but when we return here on Eye on India, we continue our discussion on the jobs market and the job scenario for India over the next 5 years. Are we future ready? That's the big question. Back, you're watching Eye on India, and we're discussing the future of jobs over the next 5 years. Mr. Chandrasekhar, let's talk about the fact that the demographic advantage that we keep talking about, and that has a lot to do with the report that's been put out. Millennials will form 30% of the population, and that will continue to drive growth, consumption, etc. as we go forward. There's a lot of talk around the Uberization, for instance, of jobs as India moves forward. What is that going to mean? There's also this business of, Mudra, Startup India, and focusing on creating entrepreneurs, micro-entrepreneurs. What is that realistically going to be able to create the kind of jobs that we need to create?
I think what's important is that these technologies are not only changing the jobs and the skills required, they're also changing the nature of work itself. And we may be well entering an era where jobs in the traditional sense may give place increasingly to what is called the gig economy, where people are working with multiple employers and so on. The big advantage in the gig economy is, referring to the earlier points made, it also enables people to work wherever they are, whenever they want, and in small slices. So it makes it easier, for example, for women, even those who are homemakers, to actually enter into the formal economy and contribute.
So Anurag, if I can ask you about the key challenges that we need to now focus on. As Mr. Chandrasekhar pointed out, this is inevitable. It is upon us. There's no looking back, so to speak. What are the top challenges that we now need to take on head on?
So I think the challenges can be looked upon from a perspective of policy, and work needs to be done by the government. Challenges also are challenges that need to be addressed by corporates. And I would also say there are challenges when it comes to us as a society. Let me start by challenges from an individual or society perspective. I think it's important that the society, people who are going to come into the job market over the next few years, understand the change that's happening. So if I was to look at students today, the courses that they're following, I think it's important for them to understand what are the courses, what are the jobs of the future, and there's a role that...
Data scientists, visual effects, graphics artists, so on and so forth. That's the sort of stuff that you ought to be focusing on.
Absolutely. Then there is, and there's a role that teachers, mentors, parents all need to play to address some of those potential imbalance that might exist.
From a corporate sector's perspective, and I know that, you know, the Indian IT sector spends billions of dollars on skilling people. I mean, what is it, when we talk about skilling for new jobs in the future, what kind of investments are we actually talking about between the private sector as well as the government? What is it going to take?
So when we look at typically taking the example of the IT sector, the skill sets which the report speaks of is they're looking at people with IoT skills, people with AI kind of skills, those kind of skill sets. Now each of these skill sets is like, you know, these can be delivered to these workforce in a modular format. It can be delivered in a digital format. So it doesn't mean that there's a huge investment required.
Sure.
And these are things which people themselves individually can pick up, or companies also can sponsor. So I don't see that in terms of reskilling for these kind of skill sets, you need a huge kind of infrastructural kind of investment. It's more on the digital, the content, and those kind of elements of the investments are required.
All right, so gentlemen, let me end then by asking, and I want you know, just a word from both you, Mr. Chandrasekhar, as well as you, Mr. Koshi. And let me start by asking you, Mr. Chandrasekhar, given where we stand today, the opportunities as well as the challenges, do you feel more optimistic about the jobs market in 2022, or are you approaching it with more caution?
I think it's a mix of, on one side, apprehension because of the enormity of the change, but also optimism because there are huge opportunities if we do things right. These technologies are so powerful, and application across sectors. You know, earlier it was about value within the technology sector or within a domain. Increasingly, value is at the junction between technology and a domain. So that's where we need to focus on, and all the points that were made about skilling. I think if we can get these right, there's a huge opportunity to improve lives of people across the country and in sectors where we are underserved at the moment.
Sure.
And create jobs in the process. So I would be optimistic as well, but we need to do a lot of things to unlock that.
So on a scale of 10, where are we today? And as we move the needle towards more formalization of the Indian economy and the opportunities and challenges that come along with it, how ready are we on a scale of 1 to 10?
Oh, that is a very tough question, but I would say it is in the middle somewhere now. It is, you can go, it is a midway stretch. You can go down, you can go up. Skills creation is only one part of the job.
Job creation and demand.
Creation
Absolutely.
need to go together.
Absolutely. And on that note, gentlemen, we will have to leave it there. Appreciate you joining us here to discuss this special report that's been put together by EY, FICCI and NASSCOM. It is going to be a challenge, but it is also an opportunity that India will need to embrace as we get ready for jobs in the next 5 years. From all of us here for now, many thanks for watching.